We know a lot about the Victorians because in their curiosity to explore life, they documented almost everything. Even something like this. I am a cigar end collector. And why? Because I can sell them back to the cigar manufacturers or onto people who want to smoke but can't afford to buy full cigars. We know of people who did jobs like this from Henry Mayhew, who documented the poor of London. And some of the worst jobs he found were jobs involving scavenging.
Why was there so much scavenging in Victorian times?
Well, of course, there'd always been people scavenging on the streets. But what happened during the Victorian period was that England was becoming more and more urbanised. More and more people were moving into the towns and the cities. And they were producing a lot more rubbish and a lot more refuse. And plus, there were just more and more people who needed to find some form of employment and some way to feed themselves.
This guy with the tall hat over here, what's he scavenging? Are these ham bones? Chicken bones?
Well, these are all sorts of bones that this bone grubber has picked up outside houses and just in the streets of London. And they were a very valuable commodity because he could sell them on to bone mills and they would be ground up and they could be used for manure and to produce soap and other products.
Oh, some of those don't smell very fresh, do they? What about this burly-looking guy? He looks just like the coalman we used to have when I was a kid.
Well, he's actually a dustman, so he's going around households emptying dustbins and collecting the dust and cinders there.
And that's what we've got here, just dust?
That's right. Most of the rubbish that Victorian households were producing was the dust and cinder from fires, and this dust would be taken by pony and cart to some of the enormous dust yards around the city, and the dust there would be sifted and sorted. Some of it would go for manure, some of it for making bricks. And there would be a lot of other very useful and valuable things mixed in with the dust. So there would be things like old boots and shoes, jewellery, rags and bones, all kinds of things that actually had a sell-on value.
This is a rather sinister-looking guy. What about this? What's that for?
Well, this man is a tosher or a sewer hunter, so he made his living going down London's ramshackle sewers, finding coins, jewellery, silver-plated cutlery, and he would use this hoe to poke around in the old brickwork. But also, if he fell into difficulty, if he got stuck in a quagmire, he could use this hoe to try and lift himself out before he sunk without a trace.
Are these the Premier League of scavengers?
These were very much the elite of scavengers because they could make as much as £2 a week from the items that they found down in the sewers. And they had to be very fit, very strong, very healthy because they faced a lot of dangers down in the sewers from attacks from rats, from the poisonous fumes that were down in the sewers.
Rummaging around in bins like these guys, collecting dust and even bits of bone, were pretty horrible jobs, but they weren't the worst. The worst scavenging job was down here on the shore. This place had 50 people a day working here. The name sounds charming, but the job of mudlark certainly wasn't. In Victorian times, this was a grim place to be.
It would have been incredibly smelly. The River Thames was basically like an open sewer. The majority of London's population, their sewage just went straight into the river, untreated. There were lots of other things that were going into the river as well, things like offal from the city's slaughterhouses, vegetable waste from the wholesale markets, even things like dead dogs, dead cats, even dead bodies from murdered people who had been tossed into the river.
So who were the people who were poking around here looking for stuff?
Well, these were the mudlarks. They were really the most wretched of people. They were very young children who were perhaps orphans, old women who were either widowed or perhaps their husbands had turned to drink and couldn't work. Well, they were really the people who were on the verge of destitution. They had no choice. They were forced to come onto the foreshore to try and find any tiny scrap that they could sell on.
Is this the kind of thing that people would have been looking for?
That's exactly the sort of thing people would look for. Any old bits of coal, bits of wood, bits of metal, particularly copper. Copper was a particularly prized metal. And things like rags and bones and old bits of rope.
Well, they can't have made much money.
Well, they certainly didn't. They would be lucky if they made maybe a penny or 2 pennies a day from what they could pick up. So these were people who were pretty much destitute.
Would they work long hours?
They could only work at low tide, so that was only for about an hour and a half every day.
So not only were they working in the most stinking place and making no money, but they didn't even have decent hours to try and make a bit more.
That's right.